Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis today, British Philosophy. From Hobbes all the way to Hume, we're using A History of Philosophy, Volume 5 by Copleston as our guide. It's going to give you a clear understanding of these philosophical giants without you having to tackle that massive volume yourself.
Yeah, it's a dense book, but it really is a rich landscape of ideas that have shaped Western thought for centuries.
It really is. It's like a philosophical road trip. And we're your expert tour guides. So we'll be encountering figures like Hobbes. Hobbes, who saw human nature as inherently selfish and a believer in absolute power of the sovereign.
Right.
But then we run into the Cambridge Platonists, and they offer a completely different perspective, emphasizing a spiritual reality and innate moral truths.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget John Locke, whose ideas about natural rights and government by consent are still debated today.
Oh, absolutely. Locke's influence on modern political thought is undeniable. But get ready for some really mind-bending concepts. When we explore George Berkeley, who argued that the physical world only exists in our minds, and then there's David Hume, the ultimate skeptic, questioning the very foundations of causality and our sense of self.
All right, so buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. Let's start with Hobbes, a man who lived through some seriously turbulent times in English history.
Yeah, Hobbes was born in 1588, a period marked by political upheaval and religious conflict. He witnessed firsthand the chaos and violence that can erupt when social order breaks down. And this experience really deeply shaped his philosophy, particularly his masterpiece, Leviathan.
Leviathan. Hobbes argues that human beings in their natural state are driven by a relentless pursuit of self-preservation. He paints a pretty bleak picture of this state of nature, describing it as a war of all against all, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah. It's a very famous quote. And it really captures that bleakness. The stark view of human nature led Hobbes to conclude that a strong, absolute sovereign is necessary to prevent society from descending into anarchy. He believed that individuals must surrender some of their freedoms to the sovereign in exchange for security and order. This idea is known as the social contract, and it's had a profound impact on political thought.
So basically, Hobbes is saying, we trade some liberty for safety. It's a trade-off that societies still grapple with today, especially when it comes to issues like national security.
And individual rights.
Exactly. Yeah. But what's even more intriguing and controversial is Hobbes' view on morality. He argues that there are no objective moral truths, no inherent right or wrong. Instead, good and evil are determined by the sovereign.
So in Hobbes' world, the ruler gets to decide what's moral. That seems to open the door to some potentially dangerous interpretations, don't you think? It certainly does. It raises questions about the limits of power and the potential for tyranny. And this is precisely where we see a sharp contrast with the Cambridge Platonists, a group of philosophers who emerged in the mid-17th century as a direct response to Hobbes' ideas. They rejected his materialism and his bleak view of human nature, arguing for a more spiritual and morally grounded understanding of the universe.
So they're basically saying, hold on, Hobbes, there's more to life than just power and self-preservation. Who are some of the key figures in this group?
Well, thinkers like Ralph Cudworth and Henry Moore were central to this movement. Cudworth, in particular, wrote a massive and influential work called The True Intellectual System of the Universe. And in it, he argued against Hobbes' materialism and defended a spiritual interpretation of reality. He believed that there are innate ideas of morality, eternal and unchanging truths that exist independently of any earthly ruler.
So for the Cambridge Platonists, morality isn't something imposed by the state. It's something we discover within ourselves, something that connects us to a higher order.
Precisely. They believe that the human mind is not simply a blank slate, as some later empiricists would argue, but rather it's endowed with the capacity for recognizing and understanding these moral truths. They emphasize the importance of contemplation, of turning inward to discover these truths, and to live a virtuous life.
It's fascinating how this group offered such a different vision of human nature and society compared to Hobbes. They weren't just disagreeing with him on a philosophical level. They were presenting an entirely different way of seeing the world and our place in it.
Absolutely. And this debate between a more materialistic and a more spiritual worldview has continued to resonate throughout the history of philosophy, often influencing political and social movements as well.
But let's move on to John Locke, a figure who had a profound impact on the development of modern democracies.
John Locke was a truly remarkable figure. He was a physician, a political advisor, and a philosopher whose ideas helped shape the course of Western history. His writings, particularly his 2 treatises of government, are considered foundational texts of liberal thought.
In his 2 treatises, Locke lays out a revolutionary argument for government by consent. He rejects the idea of divine right of kings, arguing instead that political legitimacy derives from the people. He also argues that all individuals possess natural rights to life, liberty, and property, rights that governments are obligated to protect.
Locke's concept of natural rights was groundbreaking. He believed these rights are inherent to all human beings, regardless of social status or birthright. And this idea has had a lasting impact, inspiring revolutions and democratic movements around the world.
So we can see a clear line from Locke's ideas to the American Declaration of Independence, with its emphasis on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Absolutely. Locke's influence on the Founding Fathers was profound. They saw in his writings a blueprint for a government that derives its power from the consent of the governed, a government that exists to protect individual rights rather than suppress them.
It's amazing to think that these ideas, penned by a philosopher in 17th century England, would have such a profound impact on the course of history. But Locke's contributions extend beyond political philosophy. His essay concerning human understanding revolutionized our understanding of how we acquire knowledge.
Right in the essay, Locke argues that the mind is a blank slate at birth, what he called tabula rasa. He rejected the notion of innate ideas, arguing instead that all knowledge comes from experience, from our interactions with the world, through our senses.
So instead of being born with pre-programmed ideas, we learn and grow through our experiences. This seems to have major implications for education and child development, even today.
It does. Locke's emphasis on experience and observation laid the groundwork for modern empirical science. He believed that by carefully observing the world and reflecting on our experiences, we can gain knowledge and understanding. He also made a key distinction between primary and secondary qualities.
Primary and secondary qualities, what's the difference?
So primary qualities, like shape, size, and motion, are inherent to objects themselves. They exist independently of the observer. Secondary qualities, like color, taste, and smell, are produced by the interaction between our senses and the object. They exist in our perception, not necessarily in the object itself.
So rose might not actually be red. It depends on how our eyes perceive the wavelengths of light. That's pretty mind-bending. It seems to challenge our everyday assumptions about the world.
It does. Locke's ideas force us to question the nature of reality itself. How much of what we perceive is actually out there in the world, and how much is a product of our own minds? This is a question that continues to fascinate philosophers and scientists alike.
And it's a question that takes us right to the doorstep of George Berkeley, a philosopher who took these ideas about perception to a whole new level. But before we venture into the mind-bending world of immaterialism, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll explore how Berkeley challenged the very foundations of our understanding of the physical world.
Stay tuned. Things are about to get very interesting. Welcome back to our deep dive into British philosophy.
Now we're about to step into some truly mind-bending territory with George Berkeley.
Yeah, Berkeley was an Irish philosopher and bishop, and he proposed this radical theory called immaterialism.
Immaterialism. Does that mean he didn't believe in matter at all?
Essentially, yes. Berkeley argued that the physical world as we perceive it exists only as ideas in our minds.
So you're saying this table I'm sitting at isn't actually real. It's just an idea in my head.
According to Berkeley, that's exactly right. He famously said, to be is to be perceived. And he believed that we don't directly experience material objects, only our perceptions of them.
But if we're only experiencing our perceptions, how do we know that anything exists outside of our own minds?
That's where God comes in. Berkeley believed that God is the ultimate perceiver, the one who ensures the continued existence of the world. Even though we're not looking at something, God is perceiving it, so it continues to exist.
So in Berkeley's view, God is like the cosmic observer who keeps the whole show running.
Yes, you could say that. For Berkeley, God's perception is what gives the world its stability and consistency.
This is all very thought-provoking, but I have to admit it's a bit hard to wrap my head around. What are the implications of Berkeley's theory for science? If everything is just perception, how can we study the world objectively?
That's a great question, and Berkeley had an answer for that. He believed that science is still possible, but it doesn't deal with a mind-independent reality. Instead, science studies the regularities and patterns in our perceptions, which is ultimately caused by God.
So science becomes more about understanding the laws, governing our experiences, rather than uncovering some hidden objective truth about the world.
Exactly. And that's just one of the many ways in which Berkeley's philosophy continues to be relevant today. He challenges us to think critically about the nature of perception, the relationship between mind and reality, and the role of God in our understanding of the universe.
Berkeley definitely takes us down a fascinating philosophical rabbit hole. But now let's move on to David Hume, perhaps the most influential skeptic in the history of Western philosophy.
Hume was a Scottish philosopher, historian, and essayist, known for his really clear and engaging writing style, even when tackling complex philosophical questions.
He's famous for questioning everything, from the nature of causality to the existence of the self. What were some of his most radical ideas?
Well, one of Hume's most famous arguments is his critique of causality. So we tend to think that we observe cause and effect in the world. For example, we see a billiard ball hit another ball, and we say the first ball caused the second ball to move. But Hume argued that we don't actually observe a necessary connection between events. All we see is one event following another.
So we can't prove that the sun causes the snow to melt. We just see those events happening in sequence.
Exactly. Hume argued that our belief in cause and effect is based on habit and custom, not on any kind of logical certainty. We see the sun rise and the snow melt many times, so we come to expect that one will follow the other, but we can't logically prove that one event must follow the other.
That's a pretty radical idea. It seems to undermine a lot of what we take for granted about the world and how it works.
It does. And Hume didn't stop there. He also questioned the notion of a stable, enduring self. We tend to think of ourselves as a unified entity, a me that exists over time. But Hume argued that we can't find any evidence for this enduring self. When we introspect, all we find are a series of fleeting perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and sensations.
So there's no I that exists independently of my experiences. I'm just a bundle of ever-changing perceptions.
That's Hume's view. He famously said, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." And this idea has had a profound impact on philosophy and psychology, raising questions about the nature of consciousness and personal identity.
Hume certainly shakes the foundations of our understanding of ourselves and the world. But he wasn't just tearing things down. He also had some interesting things to say about morality.
That's right. Hume rejected the idea that moral judgments are based on reason. He argued that morality is grounded in sentiment, in our feelings of approval and disapproval. We approve of actions that are useful or agreeable to ourselves or others, and we disapprove of actions that have the opposite tendency.
So it's not about cold, logical reasoning. It's about how we feel about things.
Precisely. Hume believed that our moral sentiments are rooted in our capacity for sympathy. When we see someone suffering, we naturally feel empathy for them, and this empathy, combined with our understanding of the consequences of actions, shapes our moral judgments.
This reminds me of Adam Smith, the economist. He also wrote about sympathy and moral sentiments, didn't he?
He did. Smith was heavily influenced by Hume, and his work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, explores these ideas in more detail. He argued that our moral judgments are guided by our ability to imagine how an impartial spectator would view our actions.
So it's like we're constantly checking ourselves, asking, would a neutral observer approve of what I'm doing?
Exactly. And this internal dialogue helps us develop a sense of moral propriety, of what is right and wrong, in different situations.
It's fascinating to see how these ideas about sympathy and moral sentiment connect philosophy, psychology, and even economics.
It is. It's a reminder that these different disciplines are often intertwined, each offering insights into the complexities of human nature and behavior.
This deep dive into British philosophy is already proving to be quite a journey.
And we're not done yet. We've explored some of the most influential figures in British philosophy, but there were many other thinkers who contributed to this rich intellectual tradition. Next, we'll delve into some of the responses and challenges to these ideas, exploring how the debate continued to evolve. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we'll uncover even more fascinating philosophical insights.
Welcome back to our deep dive into British philosophy. We've covered a lot of ground, from Hobbes' social contract to Hume's radical skepticism.
Yeah, we've seen how these thinkers grappled with fundamental questions about human nature, knowledge, and morality, often challenging traditional assumptions and sparking intense debates.
But the story doesn't end there. These ideas didn't just sit on dusty library shelves. They sparked responses, counter-arguments, and new ways of thinking that continue to shape our world today.
Right. One of the most prominent critics of Hume's skepticism was Thomas Reid, a Scottish philosopher who argued that Hume's radical empiricism led to absurd conclusions that contradicted common sense.
So Reid was basically saying, hold on, Hume, You can't just throw out everything we believe about the world just because you can't find a logical proof for it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Reid believed that we have a natural instinct to trust our senses and our basic beliefs about the world. He called these first principles, and he argued that we can't function without them.
So even if we can't logically prove that the world exists outside of our minds, we still have to operate as if it does.
Precisely. Reid argued that these first principles are the foundation of all knowledge, and that even Hume, for all his skepticism, relied on them in his daily life.
It's like saying, Hume, you might doubt the existence of the external world, but you still look both ways before crossing the street.
Exactly. Reid's philosophy is known as common sense realism, and it had a significant impact, especially in Scotland and America.
But did this debate just stay in the realm of philosophy, or did it have any practical consequences?
Well, Reid's ideas influenced later thinkers like Dugald Stewart, who developed a more systematic approach to moral philosophy based on the principles of common sense. He also argued for a more balanced approach to psychology, recognizing the importance of both reason and emotion.
So not just throwing out emotion altogether, as some of the more hardcore rationalists might have done.
Exactly. Stewart believed that emotions play a crucial role in our moral judgments, and that understanding human nature requires acknowledging the complex interplay between reason and feeling.
This makes me think about current debates, about the role of emotion in politics and decision-making. It seems like we're still wrestling with some of these same questions, centuries later.
We are. The legacy of these British philosophers is all around us. Their ideas about individual liberty, the role of government, the nature of morality, and the workings of the human mind have shaped our world in profound ways.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've encountered a cast of brilliant minds who wrestled with some of the biggest questions humanity has ever faced.
And while they didn't always agree, their passion for understanding the world and our place in it is truly inspiring.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? We've given you a taste of the rich intellectual feast that is British philosophy. But this is really just the beginning.
Yeah, if you're intrigued by what you've heard, we encourage you to explore further. Frederick Copleston's A History of Philosophy, Volume 5, is a great place to start. It's a challenging but rewarding read that will deepen your understanding of these thinkers and their enduring impact.
You can find a link to purchase the book in the show notes. And be sure to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more deep dives into the world of ideas. Thanks for joining us on this philosophical adventure. Keep those minds curious.